appreciate you. And I came a long ways to be with you. And many years ago, I discovered this technique after 20 years of personal growth work and all kinds of meditation practices, kundalini practices, dancing, yoga, color therapy, aromatherapy, massage, Ralphine, all these beautiful things that I was learning and practicing because I wanted, from the time I was a little child, to heal child abuse, because I was an abused child. And as a child, I could feel what was happening to my nervous system every time I got hit in the face, every time I got put down, every time someone yelled at me, every time someone kicked me. I could feel how it was making me less trusting, it was making me less intelligent, it was making me less happy. And even though I would recover, as children do, and they kind of glaze over and gloss over, and then they go, oh, today's a new day, that couldn't have really happened, and then they sort of carry on. But what I noticed is that I was shrinking. Are any of you familiar with that effect inside yourself, where you're feeling just a little less joyous? And it could be even a subtle form of abuse where you're just being neglected, where your needs aren't being attended to and nobody cares and no one's looking because they're all too busy, stressed out grown-ups in your life trying to get food on the table. Or even just being grouchy with you on a regular basis. And that sends a message to the child. And the child is looking into the parents' faces and into the parents' voice for, who am I? Who am I? And the best they can come up with is usually the adult reflection around them or the other children who may not be reflecting something completely kind. So as layers of that time went on and on and on, and it can add some really deep, entrenched, fundamental Christianity on top of it, and being forced to attend church, hours and hours and hours a week, and not allowed to play with other children who weren't in the church that I grew up in. And in the whole community that I grew up in was that church, too. There were hardly anyone I knew that wasn't involved in this religion. So I had a lot to undo. And throw a little sexual abuse on top of that, and some, public school trauma. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was single and pregnant and realizing that I needed help. Because the one thing I knew was that I didn't want to pass on what was inside me, all the insecurities, the fears, the neuroses, the low self-esteem, body issues, emotional issues, sexual issues. I didn't want to pass that on to my developing fetus. And I knew that I couldn't help but pass that on unless I figured out how to clear myself. So that set me on my path of personal growth, because I didn't love myself enough to do it, but I loved my baby enough to do it. So I started going to counseling, and I went to Codependency Anonymous, and I went to this, and I went to that, and I learned about sweat lodges, and I started developing. And over time, I slowly made progress. I learned to meditate for 10 years. Every day I meditated. And I had massive experiences, and my kundalini started to wake up, and I had huge, intense meditations, and yet I still trembled, and I still cringed, and I still didn't like the woman I saw in the mirror. By the time I was 17, I thought I was too old and too fat and too ugly to ever be loved, by the time I was 17. Does this sound familiar to anyone here inside yourself? Okay, obviously I'm not too old and fat and ugly to love. But at the time I had a distorted self-image. And so over the years, because I was investing in healing myself, I started looking around and seeing how many more people also needed the same kind of work. And I was meeting these people in classes and workshops, and I was reading books and learning about what the human mind does to itself over time and how that affects the body. So fast forward to about 6 years ago, where I was still suffering with chronic depression. I still had chronic physical pain in my body because my spine wouldn't stay in place, and it was constantly going in and out, and I was always in and out of the chiropractor's office several times a week. And I taught my friends how to adjust my back for me because I couldn't afford to keep going to the chiropractor. I was a healer. at that time, maybe helping 1 or 2 people a week with every skill that I had, and the rest of the time barely able to get out of bed, except for to take care of my child, who I was doing the best I could to love and support and protect and teach and set a good example for. So at some point I had a nervous breakdown. It was right after I dated a stalker. And after a few months of that, I had a nervous breakdown where I couldn't complete a sentence. I was shaking. If I heard a car drive up to my house, I would shake and run and hide in the closet, literally behind the clothes, hoping that that wasn't him. And at that same time, I had prayed a prayer within the last week or two of that experience and said, I want, number one, to see the people that I'm working with heal faster than I'm able to help them. And you know what? As a healer, my track record wasn't that far off of any other healers I knew. It was slow progress, repetitive sessions, lots of work, people making progress, backsliding, a little bit of progress, backsliding. I wasn't seeing huge amounts of change for these loving people who were spending their time and their money to come learn what I was trying to figure out for myself. I also saw a lot of wounded healers, because we got into healing because we were wounded and we wanted to sort ourselves out. And that became our specialty, right? So I wasn't satisfied with that. And I also knew from my prayers and meditation that I wanted to see real change comparable to what I'd heard in the scriptures. I wanted to be able to heal like Christ healed. So I allowed myself to relax and finally reach out. And a friend of mine who had learned this technique, EFT, that I'm about to teach you today, had come over to my house and said, honey, you are falling apart and you need help. So I said, okay. Show me what it is that you know. And she said, well, I just learned this off the internet because I wanted to be a healer. And I thought, you don't learn to be a healer off the internet. You learn it from sitting in the sacred fire for years and years and years. And if it doesn't make you crazy, you might learn something. She said, well, and I was shredded, so I was ready. So she sat there and tapped on my body and talked to me and asked me some questions. And as that happened, all of this pain and fear and grief flushed out of my nervous system, and I bawled and bawled and bawled. And in 4 hours, I was over the nervous breakdown. And what I felt like had led me to have such low self-esteem was crumbling away. And all I could think to myself was, I sure wish I was smart enough to learn how to do this. She traded sessions with me for about a month. We did once a week. I gave her a massage. She gave me an EFT session. And my life changed. And I put all the other tools that I was working with to help people, guided visualizations, energy work. I'm an empath, so I could feel what other people were feeling. I got very good at moving energy. I could put energy into people's bodies, take energy out, strong psychic skills. But yet none of that was restoring me neurologically, emotionally, to peace and well-being, even though I had these incredible skills, because I still had so much pain inside myself. And as this came out, my healing practice went off the charts. Without advertising, in 2 months, I had a waiting list of people to see without telling anyone other than the few people I was already working with. And they brought me their friends and they brought me their family, and I figured out how to do this technique. 6 years later, I travel all over the world. I've been to San Francisco and to New York and now to LA, all within the last 2 weeks. And I'm doing trainings to teach people who want to teach people how to do something that they should have taught me in kindergarten.